Are there any interesting stories, pastas, etc. about creepiness in St. Petersburg? Preferably without the widely circulated tourist traps like the tower with numbers and other stuff. I remember there was some pasta about a stone around which necromancers hang out. I'd be grateful if Anon throws it in. The whole of St. Petersburg is one big creepy place. And for tourist traps you should go to Thailand. I quote Liteiny Bridge aka Suicide Bridge. Even during the construction of the bridge, there were a couple of accidents with numerous victims. Subsequently, it became the most popular place to commit suicide by inhaling water. The Neva near the bridge reaches its maximum depth, about 24 meters, by the way. I googled, in fact, several frags every year. According to tales, on the bank of the Neva in this place there was an altar of local Harsh tribes, which, by order of Peter, was thrown into the river, but continues to attract lost souls, and the first accident during construction, an explosion in the caisson, occurred when the workers got to it. That's how things are. I heard exactly the same legend about Obvodny, and it applies to it more plausibly. The area is sorry. Before the revolution there were all sorts of burps and flop houses, now there are warehouses, workers' aid, and a bunch of homeless people. On May 1, 1994, a huge egg appeared on top of the tower, and the bricks of the structure were painted with numbers. Tower of Griffins, an art object created by artist Alexei Kostroma. His studio was on the top floor of the aforementioned house, and the creative group Tut Itam was called Monument to the Egg, or The Rooks Have Arrived. The artist was inspired to create this installation by the coincidence of two holidays, the Day of Solidarity of all workers and Orthodox Easter. The huge egg was installed on the top of the tower on May 1 after a procession from the manege to the courtyard of the Pell House. The event symbolized the unity of religious figures, workers, and artists. From the author's words, unfortunately, rooks no longer build nests in large polluted cities. Our city, which is obviously rotting, needs urgent rehabilitation. It follows that the monument has another meaning, an ecological one. The artist included the work in the list of his inventories. Since 1990, he numbered all the objects he wanted to save, which explains the appearance of numbers on the bricks of the tower. The numbers written on the bricks are nothing more than an encrypted code of the universe. The one who counts all the numbers on the tower is promised, at least, the fulfillment of desires, according to another version, immortality, we read in one of the guidebooks. They wanted to demolish this tower, but in the end it remained, but the numbers were completely painted over and a code door was installed. It is difficult to vouch for the accuracy of such stories, but if there is a thick smoke screen, if it lasts for centuries, then there is probably at least a small tongue of living red-yellow-blue fire behind this screen. The same is true of legends about the afterlife of Peter I. Already in 1729, an unpleasant rumor was circulating in St. Petersburg, that in high water, in the wind from the bay and in bad weather, a tall man with a club in his hand, with madly burning eyes, wanders along the banks of the Neva. There was no embankment then. This demon could be encountered in winter too, especially in a snowstorm, in a blizzard. Most often, the creature was also seen on the banks or on paths leading through the ice of the Neva. It was said that it was impossible to make out his face. He was wrapped in a wide cloak, and from under the cloak his eyes blazed, burned with a satanic fire, so that it was impossible to see the devil. They also said that the creature had a tiny head despite its enormous height and long, tenacious arms. I would not vouch for the veracity of these stories, but in any case, these stories were told in the 1730s to 1770s, even before the appearance of the bronze horseman. They said that the giant would beat people he met with a club, and if he did not beat someone to death, then this was the worst of all. A meeting with the ghost of Peter I foretells misfortune, the premature death of those closest to you. If, God forbid, you encountered Peter, and he did not touch the club, only glared at you with blood-red demonic eyes, then run home as fast as you can, run immediately, hurry, if you want to have time to say goodbye to the creatures dear to you. In 1782, the Bronze Horseman appeared in St. Petersburg, and immediately the corresponding stories began to be associated with it. Of course, The Bronze Horseman by Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin is an original literary work, the immortality of which depends on the talent of the author, and not on the properties of the folk legend. But Pushkin relied on the legend. At least, this layer of urban folklore has been known since the very beginning of the 1790s. The monument to Peter was credited with the ability to break away from its pedestal and gallop around the city in search of a bloody victim. This happened, as you might guess, on dark autumn nights, when the wind drove water from the bay into the Neva, threatening a flood, and low clouds sowed rain and did not let the light of the stars to St. Petersburg. The terrible horseman, if you believe the legends, went hunting in snowstorms and blizzards, when a December day lasted only a few hours, and the residents of St. Petersburg lived almost all the time by the light of the then very imperfect lanterns and candles. Is this true? Is it not true? It is also very difficult to say. It is not easy to discern the glint of a light behind the smoke layers. The main thing is that long before Pushkin's Bronze Horseman they were saying in St. Petersburg that during high water, during strong autumn storms or in a winter snowstorm, the monument to Peter would fall from its pedestal, gallop through the city, and supposedly they had even seen the corpses of those crushed by the monstrous horseman. True. Fiction. But, in any case, there was a legend, and some remnants of it live in the city to this day. Pushkin wrote based on the legend. The dead of night on September 24, 1792, was stormy. The moon was diving between the clouds, and most of the time it was not visible. It was very dark, unseasonably cold. It would start to pour and then stop raining. The wind blew in gusts from the sea, and it grew stronger towards night. The wind drove water from the Gulf of Finland, the Neva slowed down, and a flood was seriously expected. That evening, an elderly 12th class official, Nikolai Sergeyevich Petrov, went to visit an old friend, the lamplighter Sidorkin. In order to serve all his life and remain an official of the 12th class at the age of 53, one had to be barely literate, not show any special talents, and also not have any patrons or strong relatives. From which we can conclude that Petrov was a completely ordinary person and belonged to the very bottom of the Petersburg population. Probably, his parents were concerned about giving their son some kind of education, at least at the level of basic literacy, and bowed their resources to some important person. However, we do not know who Petrov's parents were, and all this is pure speculation, although, with a high degree of probability, this is approximately how it was. In any case, Petrov served his entire life in the city municipality, and did not make any kind of career at all. His common origin is indicated by both the surname Petrov and his close friendship with the lamplighter, a man who was not from the official world at all, but an ordinary city bourgeois. In those days, the city authorities hired a lamplighter for every 20 lamps, who had to light them in the evening, put them out in the morning, and maintain them in working order. Probably, Petrov and Sidorkin came from the same environment and understood each other well. That evening, Petrov came to visit Sidorkin. He was renting an apartment in the harbor. Probably, this apartment was also given to him by the city authorities. Most likely, from the very beginning he wanted to persuade his comrade to spend the night at his place. Petrov himself lived on the Vyborg side, in his own house. The Vyborg side is higher. Minor floods, when the water rises less than a fathom, are not terrible for it. We can make many assumptions about why the comrades did not immediately go to the Vyborg side. They got carried away talking, played cards, waited for the wind from the Gulf of Finland to die down. Let's be honest, we do not know all these reasons. we can only guess what the friends were thinking about and why they left so late. In any case, the wind did not die down, the water was rising, the waves dully beat against the stones of the embankment, and the comrades, to be on the safe side, set off for Vyborgskia in the dead of night. What time, they themselves did not know, because wristwatches did not exist at that time. Later, Sidorkin would show that it was the second half of the night. Probably the friends determined this by their condition and by the position of the moon in the sky. The soldiers on guard duty at the Admiralty determined the time more precisely. Let me remind you that at that time the Admiralty was not yet a purely administrative, bureaucratic institution. In the huge quadrangle, surrounded by a high blank wall, they built ships and launched them into the Neva right there, within sight of the windows of the Winter Palace, opposite the building of the 12 Collegiums and the Menshikov Palace. The soldiers heard wild cries at about 2 o'clock in the morning, but it never occurred to them to leave their guard duty, go out into the square and see what was going on. And who knows who gets killed or robbed in the city. The main thing is service. Or maybe the soldiers had other reasons not to leave the walls under any circumstances. The next morning, the police discovered the body of Nikolai Sergeyevich Petrov, almost at the very walls of the Admiralty, approximately where the Perjevalsky monument now stands. What is characteristic is that the police heard absolutely nothing at night and did not learn anything about what had happened until the morning, despite the fact that the screams were heard in the very center of the city, several hundred steps from the Winter Palace. There can be two assumptions here. The first is that the St. Petersburg police were so effective and reliable. The second assumption is based on the fact that the police deliberately did not stick their noses in at night. At least, they definitely did not stick their noses in some parts of the city. As we will see, it is possible that the police had good reasons for this. In any case, the body was found in the morning. Nikolai Sergeyevich was lying face down, as if driven into semi-liquid mud. All his bones were broken, as if he had been caught and beaten with clubs. When the body was loaded onto a cart, it was like a rag, as the documents of that time figuratively put it. An expression of extreme horror was frozen on his face. It turned out to be extremely easy to establish who this dead man was, who he was with, and who he was from. It was more difficult to get coherent testimony from Sidorkin, although he remained alive. Mikhail Sidorkin was found on the road behind the first barrier, about 10 miles from the scene of the incident. Apparently, he had been running through the storm until he collapsed. The soldiers at the barrier picked up the unknown man, poured him some alcohol, and demanded that he tell them who he was. He fought back until he realized that they were soldiers in front of him, tried to say something, but he still couldn't say anything, he had lost his tongue. Sidorkin identified Petrov, covered his face with his hands and shook at the sight of the corpse. Sidorkin was able to speak only 2 days later, but we don't know his testimony. Either the police didn't interrogate Sidorkin at all, which is completely incredible, or the materials from these interrogations were not preserved. Later we will learn the probable fate of these important documents. So, for 2 days the most important witness cannot say anything, he only shakes and does not let people go, clings to their clothes, gets worried, moans if they try to leave him alone in the room. If at night they try to put out or take the candle out of his room, he falls into real hysterics. The invited doctor advises not to offend him, to leave the soldier with him all the time, not to put out the candle, let the fright pass. The advice turned out to be correct, but even during these 2 silent days the police take very curious steps. At that time, the police of St. Petersburg was headed by a special rank, the chief policeman. The chief policeman had an assistant, the policeman. For each of the 10 parts of the city, the position of a bailiff, or district policeman, was introduced. The parts of the city were divided into blocks, approximately 50 to 80 houses, and in each block there was a block supervisor, and to assist him, a block lieutenant was elected by the population for 3 years. Who was supposed to deal with the death of a minor official, one of the most insignificant and inconspicuous residents of the city. Of course, the district police officer was supposed to conduct the investigation. In our case, this is what happens. Already on the morning of September 25th, the district police officer calls the bailiff. Not because for some reason he cannot investigate the case himself, not in order to report to his superiors, so that the superiors are in the know. The district police officer simply hands over the case materials to his superiors, inexplicably and unexpectedly. The bailiff immediately reports to the chief of police of the city. He does not hand over the case, but informs, right there, without wasting an hour. The chief of police himself orders that the documents, whatever they are, be brought to him, and immediately goes to the Queen. It is not even the speed with which he received an audience that is curious. After all, he is the head of police in the capital, one of the most important officials in the entire empire. It is much more curious that Catherine II immediately ordered that Sidorkin be kept isolated from everyone, in a separate room, without harassment, and that doctors be called to him immediately. And as soon as he started talking, the lamplighter was to be brought to her, to Catherine. Thanks to this order, Sidorkin was treated so humanely, kept in a separate room, well fed, and they inquired whether he wanted to sleep with a candle or not. It is very possible that, if there had been no royal decree on his account, his fate would have been much harsher. What amazes me is not even Catherine's involvement in Sidorkin's fate. After all, he may have been small, inconspicuous, and insignificant, but he was a subject of the enormous Russian Empire, and why shouldn't the Empress have taken pity on this little man and ordered that he be treated humanely? Surely, Catherine knew that the police are not humane to everyone and not always. Two facts are surprising: the speed with which the story of the death of an insignificant official and a frightened lamplighter reached the very top. And the second is the very desire of the Queen to be the first to interrogate Mikhail Sidorkin. This in itself smacks of the darkest surrealism. After all, it was 1792. Griffin Tower, Rotunda, aka Devil's Staircase. There is a mysterious place on Gorokhoffaya Street called Rotunda. A number of circumstances led to the fact that an ordinary residential building built by the merchant Ustinov in 1827 became a concentration of mysteries and secrets. All of them are connected with the legend that secret meetings of members of Masonic lodges were held in this house in the 19th century. Secret, because Masonic organizations were officially banned in Russia in 1822. At the foot of the stairs in the house on Gorokhoffaya there is a small door leading to the basement, in which the newly converted brothers allegedly underwent the initiation ceremony. Miracles in this house still happen today. They say that those who try to get into the basement quickly age or go crazy. In the post-perestroika period, this place was considered a cult place among young people. Hippies and rock and rollers gathered in the rotunda. There's an abandoned mental hospital on Novokirkiskaya, with a cemetery in the backyard. I've been inside. Anon, it's fucking nuts. After 10 minutes in that fucking hospital, I came across some guys covered in blood, cutting something. Naturally, I ran away from there in 0.12 seconds. I really hope it was a dog or something. Later, my buddy was there. He says they washed all the blood off. Now it's really hard to get in.
Tell me more.
In short, there is one hospital that was closed for some unknown reason. One thing is known: it is a mental hospital. The windows are boarded up. It is almost impossible to get in, only if you jump over the wall on the side of the climb. The climb looks like this: a bar is bent from the backside of the perimeter. There is a cemetery in the backyard of the hospital. Apparently, they buried the dead in this hospital there. It is located at the Novokirkiskaya metro station. It is not a long walk and easy to find. Security is almost zero, since people go through the same climb into the territory in order to shorten the road. The chance of being caught if you keep quiet is almost zero. The hospital itself looks creepy, both inside and out. A lot of garbage and paint peeled off the walls. There are a couple of stories about Satanists hanging out there, that 2 schoolgirls were allegedly raped and killed there. However, no matter how many times I've been there, there's never been a single person, except for the case I wrote about above. After that I never showed up there again, and every time I had to pass by, I got goosebumps. And there's nothing more to tell. If you have any specific questions about this object, ask. The old Lutheran cemetery on Vasilevsky Island is a pretty creepy place, especially in the evening, since there's almost never anyone there, and the graves are so old. It's interesting that some of the tombs are in ruins, probably back in the 90s, and the monuments that were on top have been dumped inside. It turns out to be like little semi-basements, and you can climb into some of them. I actually climbed into one once. It was creepy, especially when I found some bones in the corner, covered in something that looked like skin. Pickrel, photos from there. Honestly, it was a bit scary.